Hey, good evening, guys. Going to do a cold opening here because of technical problems. Plus, the drone is broken. There's a motor that went out when I was trying to fly that earlier, and it's out of service. And I'm not too sure if it can be repaired because that's one of those cheaper drones. So we'll just have to see what happens there. Okay, and yeah, I am a little bit behind on everything. I've tried to do a cross-section analysis on paper. I was going to show that to you guys, but ran out of time and could not get the camera hooked up. So we're just going to, I guess, start out with the surface analysis and do our usual look at what's happening. Okay, well, we are bringing up the moisture in Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas Panhandle. The dry line is further west than what we've been seeing the past couple of days. And that's a reflection of the greater moisture that's been working into the higher terrain of Texas there. Let's see, we got 60 there at Borger. So yeah, I think we're looking at that dry line just east of Lubbock and then southward along the Caprock. And then up to the north, we've got a cold front pushing south. Looks like that is already through Dalhart to past Clayton, but not quite to Raton. Winds are still showing south in that area. So it looks like our front is oriented something like this. And then the dry line intersects with this front somewhere in southeastern or southwestern Kansas, just southwest of Dodge City right there. So that's kind of the setup there at the surface, and let's get an idea where the better moisture is. We've got a 68 dew point at Alva, 66 at Medicine Lodge, 68 at Wichita there, and it looks like it kind of tapers off as you go east. So I'm going to put the moisture axis right through here. Hutchinson down to Enid, and it probably continues on south through the Anadarko and Wichita Falls area. All right, let's check out the other charts. There they are. Okay. Okay, there's the SPC analysis. Looks like we got a little bit of a kind of a bow echo. This is kind of a an MCS that's kind of broken up into a couple of segments there that are bowing out. Also, the same thing going on down in Oklahoma. You can see the bowing on that. And when I was looking at the radar earlier, some of the individual cells were also doing the same sort of bowing stuff. Now, it does look like we have a discrete cell, tiny bit out ahead of the line right there. This is around Tuttle, and looks like it's heading towards the Moore and Norman area. So hopefully we don't have a repeat of the stuff that's been happening over the past 15 years. So yeah, we can definitely see that hook. There's the storm relative velocity right there. And it's showing that couplet right there around the amber area. Fortunately, it looks like the velocities are not particularly high. So from the Norman radar, we're seeing, let's see if we can get that velocity showing up down there at the bottom. Looking at about 26 coming into the radar, 55 out. Need to balance out a little bit. It looks a little bit better there. 40 in and about 40 out, so about 80 knots of shear. And this does look fairly wide, looking at about 4 miles there. So this is indicating lots of broad scale rotation. Now, just looking at this, I'm not too sure if there's anything on the ground, but it does look like earlier there probably was something. The 0.8 frame for, let's see here, 5 minutes ago does show this little feature right down here. Let me see if I can bring up the street overlays. Give me a second and we'll bring up the streets here. It's one good thing about GR Level 2 and GR Level 3. You can import the shape files, and that's what we're doing right here. And there we go. We can see the town of Amber right there. And it looks like maybe about 3 miles southwest of there was what looks like a kind of a very tight circulation. That could certainly be a tornado right there. Don't have a newer frame at this time, but down at the lower 0.5 it has updated. And I don't see anything particularly strong in that lowest frame. Let me back this up to about 5 minutes ago. And it did look much better earlier. This is the 0.5, showing the tight rotation there. And what we were looking at earlier was the 0.8. And you can see that feature there showed up a little bit better. Let's back that up and get some more time continuity. Yeah, we definitely had something a little bit stronger out in that area northwest of Chickasha. So in any case, that storm right there is going through a little bit of a weakening cycle. And at this time, it looks like that right there looks very HP-ish. So I'm sure a lot of the chasers that are out on this storm, they're probably out there on I-44 or just to the west of there, trying to get a look into that cell there. So anyway, yeah, this is coming into the southwest Oklahoma City metro area, and we'll come back and look at this momentarily. Elsewhere on the north end of that QLCS, we do have a tornado warning. That's going to be just north of Rush Springs, and let's look at the velocity. And that's what we're looking at, I think, right there. That's probably a little QLCS spin up. Let me bring that back a couple frames. And there it is right there. And let me set a dot, and you can see what that looks like on the reflectivity. So you can kind of see this is right out ahead of that line, and it's very common when we have these bowing structures to the north of that bow, kind of along the leading edge. That does tend to be kind of a common area for vortices. That and on the backside where we have the bookend vortex. Those are two prominent locations. So the tornado warning is out for that right there. And we'll just finish looking at that, back that up a little bit, and we can kind of see the genesis of that just west of Rush Springs there. So it's very brief. That only lasted about 10 or 15 minutes there, and now it looks like it's starting to widen out a little bit. Further down the line, doesn't look like too much going on down towards the Red River, but way out to the edge of the Twin Lakes radar, we do have a couple cells north of Abilene that do look a little bit strong. All right, we'll go ahead and just switch over to the large-scale analysis. We can see that deep trough out there giving us our weather. So we've got very strong flow coming up from the southwest right there. Kind of a broad jet coming up on El Paso. Winds about 50 to 60 knots up at 500 millibars. And we can see the departure of that ridge across the Great Plains. Set up at 700 millibars, showing moderate capping. Just a few 10s and 11s down there near I-20 and around Oklahoma City, closer to 7. So you can't really go necessarily by the 700 millibar temperature as an absolute value, but you know, commonly during spring events we tend to see ranges around 7 to 10 degrees during severe weather outbreaks. And I think during Greensburg, I think that was up near 10 or 11. Very warm conditions up at 700 millibars. Then at 850, this is showing the good moisture coming north. The 60 degree isodrosotherm is going to look something like this. And then the 55 is going to look something like that right there. So very good moisture coming north. And let's look at the thermal picture. Okay, I'm just double checking everything looks good. That's actually a little bit old, so let me reload that, bring up the 18Z data, and then we should be good to go. I'm going to use 1,000 through 850 millibar thickness to get a little bit closer down to the surface. And we can see that Pacific frontal system coming through West Texas. And up to the north, a warm front in Kansas. So this is much smaller, and the gradients are not quite as strong as the systems we've been seeing during the wintertime. But this is actually pretty common as we get into May and June. The systems, they tend to be a little bit more compact, and the features are more subtle. Okay, let's bring up some satellite. This should be interesting. This will show you what the storms in Kansas looked like earlier today. Okay, so what you're looking at here, Canadian is down in this area. Dodge City is right about there. So this is the eastern Oklahoma Panhandle into southwestern Kansas. So running that forward, you can see a pretty good cloud shadow up there around Alva and Fort Supply, and a very good moisture field, showing lots of stratocumulus and cumulus out ahead of these cells. So there's that storm right there, and down to the south, this is how things looked earlier. The dry line at this time was out to the west, and this is where we saw the storms initiate. So that right there is the very first towers going up there east of Amarillo. And as you can see, there's a lot of cirrus moving into the area. A lot of subtropical moisture coming up from Mexico there. And let's update this with the latest imagery. And we should see a much different picture there. Okay, so this is going to be current here. And this is showing the overshooting tops there as these storms roll into the Oklahoma City area. And then out to the west, lots of clear air coming into the panhandles. Just a little bit of high-level altocumulus and cirrus. So let's get these mesoscale models updated. And we'll get one going also for the southern plains. Okay, and I don't have a water vapor image. I'm a little bit behind the curve today, so I'm going to leave you with this image as I go through the chat. And we'll check in here and see what's going on. So, yeah, I do apologize for all the glitches and technical problems today, but This just kind of comes with the territory when we start getting into storm season. So hopefully by tomorrow and the following day we should be in much better shape. Robert Pleasant is here, 72 degrees in eastern Tennessee. We've got Ryan Toomey's there in Florida, Mick in Australia. Carl Burkhoff is here, and Megan John, 63 in central Minnesota. Good to hear finals are over. Willie Greenway checking in from Georgia. Funwood Tech. Ryan noticing the linear modes on those cells in Oklahoma. Brett Dean reporting 75 there at his place. Burl H, frontal boundary passing through Iowa City. Christian Flock says, finally, tornadoes in Oklahoma. Yeah, it's finally starting to feel like spring here. Jeff Kropp lurking from Noah Nesdis. I remember a guy that used to work there, Steve Ambrose, back in the 90s. He gave me, well, a bunch of us, he gave us a tour of the place. That was when we were working with that old International Weather Watchers organization. We had a meeting out there. It's pretty interesting. They were still in some old business park out there in Suitland. Brett Dean, radar scope and following the highest DBZs. Yeah, I was looking at that cell up in northern Kansas last night. I don't know how many of you saw that, but I was seeing some really amazing reflectivities as these cells got going up in this area. And I saw about 78 DBZs on one of those cells, and that's probably one of the highest intensities I've ever seen on any cell. My color palette in GR level 2 is going way up into the purples. So obviously we had some very large wet hail, and of course wet hail is about the best reflector you can get. Megan John seeing amazing velocity readings coming out of the storms a couple of hours ago. David Lumbert, Maumelle, Arkansas, 87. And Jeff Kropp, author of Wind Grids, that's correct. Storm chasing in Oklahoma, where would we suggest? Have to check that out later. And we got Michelle Kurlan, Chris Tyne, Alexander Nasinski, looking for a forecast for Southern California. We'll see what we can do. Brett Dean is here. Sue M, 80 degrees today. Alexander Woods reporting 92, mostly sunny in Manchester, Connecticut. Yep, Brett Dean, severe weather heading for Oklahoma City. And Shirley Keast, 50 degrees in Michigan. And best weather PT, big storms all the way up to the Midwest there. All right, let's keep it going. This is how it looked earlier today, and let's update that. Storms have definitely gone up there, so not much to see at this hour. Storms all the way from Kansas City all the way down to around Junction, Texas. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and look ahead at the models and then come back to what's happening there in Oklahoma City right now. So for the short term, starting with the central U.S., you can see the model picked up very well on that MCS. And then going forward through the evening, they push very quickly into Missouri and Arkansas. So it looks like probably a little bit of spotty severe weather through that area tonight. And that'll push on into Illinois by the pre-dawn hours. And it looks like another MCS getting going there in Texas overnight. And we'll come back and look at that right there. And then out there in Colorado, you can see the effect of the cutoff low. So lots of instability in that region, cold temperatures aloft, and as we get the heating coming up tomorrow, I would expect to see some storms flaring up in that area. So down in Texas, storms will continue marching eastward through Oklahoma, and then we develop a southern MCS around San Angelo, and looks like that'll move overnight into the Dallas and Tyler area, and then up into Arkansas. And as that moves eastward, looks like we got our low up to the north redeveloping, and that'll set the stage for whatever is going to happen tomorrow. So let's go ahead and take a look at the NAM to see what that's going to do for tomorrow. As you can see, today we're under the influence of this large trough, so lots of cyclonic flow, and it looks like we got this one short wave moving into West Texas there, helping to destabilize things. Overnight, looks like maybe, I don't know, it's probably an artifact from that convection. Let's see how things look tomorrow. The flow is very featureless. It's very channeled, so whatever happens is not going to be influenced too much by the upper levels. And by evening it looks like this. So jet max coming out of the Big Bend area up into Oklahoma. Looks like maybe a little bit of left front quadrant action, northern Missouri, southern Iowa, Kansas City. So we'll have to keep an eye on that right there as we look at the surface charts. And then going into Friday, looks like this next wave approaches, maybe some increased lift. And then that trough passes through overnight, and then for Saturday, that trough is going to be approaching Alabama, Tennessee, and Mississippi. So we're going to come under the influence of this ridging for the weekend in the Great Plains. And then let's just take a quick look at the GFS. We'll look at the dew point there and see what's going to happen. I don't think we've got the full run here. Let me reload that. It's only going out to 180 hours. So here we go. Looks like it's loading now. So you can see those charts coming in. I think we can go ahead and start rolling through those. So this evening it looks like there's been a little bit better response in the surface wind field than what we were thinking yesterday. Pretty good cyclone out there in western Oklahoma and the panhandles. And then what you can see here is looks like that wave moves northeast up along the frontal boundary. So it appears by tomorrow around 21Z it's going to be drifting up to the Omaha area. So maybe that left front quadrant will be active. So that's linked down to the frontal system, and that's going to be roughly in this area here. Kind of a warm front there in Iowa. So maybe some potential in that area right there. And then further down to the south you can see the dry line extending down Oklahoma City to just west of Fort Worth. The flow, however, is a little bit veered. So that's going to shorten the photographs a little bit. And let me see if I can show that to you. I'm going to put a photograph on the Muskogee, Oklahoma area. And up to the top right on the photograph, we do have a little bit of 0 through 1 kilometer shear, but it's not as stretched out as it could be. Typically we see a trace that looks a little bit more like that right there. So the southwesterly component is putting most of the photograph into that quadrant. Everything from the southwest there. So by the time we get max heating tomorrow, looks like some of the best convergence is going to be west of Fort Worth. And then possibly a few storms along the dry line further up to Kansas. However, this is going to come down to how much camping we have. So let me just take a quick look at the cap there. Looks a little bit weaker there. And let me verify that against the NAM. Since the GFS does not really have great resolution, bring this up to a max heating for Thursday, put that around Denton. And yeah, the cap looks a little bit weaker for tomorrow. So working up our convective parameters there. One problem I see is the instability does look a little bit, I don't know, to me it looks a little bit on the low side. It's kind of hard doing these computations by hand by just drawing on that, but we're probably looking at maybe 1500 to 2000 CAPE. I'm not too sure about these high values. And let's see here, 0th 1 kilometer shear looks moderate. Forecast algorithm there predicting possible tornadoes there in that area, so probably another outbreak of severe weather tomorrow. And let's finish off the GFS. So that wave will be moving up into the Midwest tomorrow. So once again, by Thursday night, there's that wave right there. And as a result, since the main surface system is up there, that's what's causing the flow to be a little bit veered down in the southern plains. Then going into Friday, more moisture coming northward. However, the cold front now enters the picture, driven by this 1030 millibar high. So by Friday, we're probably looking at a lot of forced convection in Texas and Louisiana. So that will be drying out the plains. Probably be looking at maybe a slight risk down to the south. And let's see how things look for Saturday. Front stalling out on the Texas Gulf Coast. Looks like a quiet afternoon there on the plains, and then for Sunday, similar picture, but the moisture is starting to come up a little bit there in the low plains. And then with this boundary in northern Oklahoma, maybe a chance of some showers in Kansas for Sunday. Then by Monday, it appears that the flow starts turning around to the south. And possibly by Tuesday, we're going to start seeing that dry line setting up once again out along the Cap Rock. So I think probably by Tuesday at least we're going to have storms out there in the Childress, Dodge City area, Goodland, and maybe a little bit of upslope there in the region north of I-70. And then things will be moving east out onto the low plains around Wednesday. It's almost like a replay of this week. And then Thursday, yeah, there's another stable wave. Things are just right on track with the calendar. But this time we don't have a cold front moving south, so the flow recharges pretty quickly. So by Friday, more chances of thunderstorms, and then maybe a chase weekend coming up for the 12th and 13th. Now we have another frontal system coming out of the northern plains right there. So that'll bring a cold front southward on Sunday. Storms for Texas, and then maybe a little bit of dry weather for the 15th, 16th, and 17th. And I think things look good for storms for the third week of May there. I don't see any problems with this pattern. So the pattern is starting to normalize here, and we're getting back into some springtime typical weather. Okay, checking in Oklahoma City, that system is moved east-northeast. It's now approaching West Norman there. And we still got a tornado warning out on that. Let's check out the velocity. Now I prefer starting with the base velocity so I can make sure that I'm looking at least at a little bit of raw data. So that way if there's a weird pattern on the storm out velocity, I'll be able to recognize what's going on pretty quickly. So keep in mind the radar is right there. So we're viewing the storms like that, and we do see a convergent signature near more. So winds are coming together there, and that's indicative of an updraft, and probably a downdraft in that region too. So they're kind of paired together there. And let's see, we've got about 50 knots. That's up at about 800 feet. So we'll probably get some good gusts coming into more with that. And then looking further south, I don't see any tight circulations in this. So at the moment it's looking okay. But let's go up to 0.8 because we're getting close to the radar site. And I've noticed, especially with Twin Lakes, sometimes features will show up at 0.8 that don't show up at 0.5. So I prefer checking all those low levels. And what we see here, just kind of an outflowish signature there. And speaking of outflow, let's look at the spectrum width and see if we can pick up the outflow boundary. And there it is. Very easy to see. So that can give us an idea of how much outflow dominance there is on this storm. So this particular outflow boundary is still pretty close to the downdraft area, so what that means is the updraft is not quite being undercut by this stuff. So there's still potential here for severe weather. But at this time, I'm not seeing anything here that looks threatening. Now, one thing that you can use this imagery for is to gauge the clear air profile. This will give you an idea how much shear there is in the environment out to the east of these storms. And you'll notice that we have this red area and this green area, and then in between we've got this white line, and that's called the zero line. And at any particular spot along the zero line, the wind flow is going to be perpendicular to the direction of the radar site. So at that spot right there, the flow is out of the south-southeast. However, keep in mind that this spot here is about 1,000 feet off the ground because the radar beam is kind of like a cone as it spreads out. So this is telling us that about 1,000 feet off the ground, the wind is out of the south-southeast, and information like that can be important if you're trying to gauge changes in the helicity out in front of these storms. Also, the shape of the zero line can be that can tell you something. See, right now the zero line looks kind of like that, so it's a little bit symmetric. However, sometimes you'll get a pattern that looks like this. So what does that tell you? Well, out here it tells you the flow is out of the south-southeast, but if we go an equal distance from the radar, and I say equal distance because we got to get up to the same height as this, this is out of the east-southeast. So that would indicate the flow here would be a little bit more backed, and any storms out in this area would have better storm route helicity. So this could be like a localized backing of the wind. Now, we're not seeing that right now. Maybe actually, now that I mention it, there's something like that going on there. So there could be a little bit of something going on locally out in this area, maybe kind of backing the wind profile, so that we would probably have to monitor that. But anyway, that's something you can use, and then you can take this information right here to get an idea of the velocity. And keep in mind I'm using the base velocity here because I want this relative to the ground. So I'm seeing about 25 to 30 knots just off the surface. And then I go up to the higher tilts just to kind of pack everything closer together. And this little core right here, this is the low-level jet. That's up at about 2,500 feet, and we can see the winds in that are about 42 knots or so. So WEATHERWed is certainly in place, and just a very tiny easterly component to that. So it's a good idea to kind of get used to that and look at the clear air wind field and get comfortable with using that, because that will definitely help you out a lot. So anyway, yeah, there's not a whole lot going on right now. This storm is very outflowish, pushing through the Oklahoma City area out into the, looks like it's already past Frontier City, and the rest of it entering Moore and Norman at this time. It still doesn't look like anything too bad at this moment. And then the spectrum width, that can kind of paint the location of that outflow boundary. Okay, elsewhere, down to the south, there's the line of thunderstorms all the way down to the Red River. And we'll take one look at the DIAS radar. Yeah, so it appears a couple of tornado warnings in eastern Kansas, one in the Oklahoma City area, and all of this stuff just severe warnings down there. And this stuff does appear to be a little bit more outflowish. See that right there? That's about a good 10 miles from the storms. I'm measuring that. That's about 12 miles from the leading edge of those storms. So these are kind of gusty and cool, probably entraining a little bit more dry air. And then the spectrum width, that's showing just a little bit of that outflow boundary. And let's check out what's happening in Kansas. We'll go to the Kansas City radar. And I'm just going to skim chat real quick and let's see here. Kansas wedge tornado north of Salina last night, rated an EF3. Thanks, Mr. Manlet. Some good information there. Ryan Toomey's verifying that. Mike Estwick says, I got to watch for a quick spinner in that line in Oklahoma City. Another severe storm warning in Janesville, Wisconsin. Did I forecast a DIAS? Yes, I did. Actually, if you search my channel, you'll find, I think there's one or two videos from the DIAS weather station when I worked there. And that showed a storm coming into that area. So, yeah, at one time I was forecasting for B1s and C130s, and now I'm forecasting for you guys. So there's what we got going on there in Kansas. Definitely a line right there, so we're probably looking at some embedded vortices in that line right there. Doesn't look like a whole lot going on right now. Maybe a little bit of circulation right there. That's around Richmond. Let's see how things looked earlier. And yeah, it did look better earlier. So once again, we're kind of on the dissipation phase of those cells there. But very likely we're going to see probably a couple more spin-ups here and there through the evening, and then things should start winding down after dark here. So that's probably all I got for this evening. I'm going to go ahead and take a break here. It's been kind of a long day, and I'm not too sure what we're going to do about that drone. I'm going to see if I can get parts or something. I'm also thinking about maybe upgrading it, so I don't know. We'll have to see how that goes there. Anyway, that's all I got for tonight. I appreciate you all joining, and we'll do it all again tomorrow. Take care, and we'll see you tomorrow.